Shantz. I'm a faculty member in the Criminology department here at Kwantlen, and I'm active with the Critical Criminology Working Group at Kwantlen. The working group is an association of faculty and students and community members that has come together really to bring critical attention and to address issues of social justice, community organizing, and also to bring an analysis to bear on the real sources of social harm in our society, which are the harms brought about by economic and political power holders, and to shift the focus of criminology away from the sort of low-level activities that it tends to give too much attention to look at the high-level, impactful, destructive activities engaged in by economic and political elites, particularly looking at state crime and corporate crime and so forth. So I welcome you here tonight. And I have a statement that I'm going to read off the top. I've been asked to deliver by the administration, which is just a reminder. KPU upholds and respects academic freedom and the right of students to be exposed to multiple global perspectives. We remind attendees and participants that the views expressed in this presentation do not represent any ideological or political position held or under consideration by KPU administration. And in case you're wondering, yes, there was an attempt to shut us down tonight.
But we're not.
But we are here, and we are strong, and we thank our arts office
Thank you.
For their support, and they have reconfirmed that support by supporting us with a special purpose fund grant, which we just got word that we have again received for this year tonight. And we received a grant last year as well in support from the faculty.
Thank you.
I was a little nervous about the statement. Before we begin the event tonight, I'd like to start by saying that we at Red Sparks Union and the Critical Criminology Working Group acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the unceded territories of the Kwantlen, Katsi, Samiamu, and Tsawwassen nations. These territories have never been ceded to the Canadian state through either military defeat or by treaty. We know that the land we're on has come to be known as Canada and British Columbia through a process of dispossession, displacement, occupation, and genocide of Indigenous people. We know that the liberation of all people on these territories is ultimately linked and bound up to the struggle of the Indigenous peoples of this land. This event is being hosted by Red Sparks Union and the Critical Criminology Working Group, but it's also endorsed by Migrante BC, the Canada-Philippines Solidarity for Human Rights, the South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy, the Canada-Palestine Association, Voice of Palestine, Samadoun, Alliance for People's Health, and the Boycott Israeli Apartheid Campaign. And this is actually Israeli Apartheid Week from March 2nd until March 14th. So Red Sparks Union and the Critical Criminology Group decided to hold these events in celebration of International Women's Day to promote and celebrate women's central role in revolutionary struggle. We hold this event in the spirit of reclaiming the militant history of International Women's Day. And I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the history of International Women's Day. In the midst of turbulent and political economic times prior to World War I, over 20,000 women garment workers staged a general strike for 13 cold New York winter weeks, and their call was better pay and better working conditions. Inspired by Italian and Jewish immigrant garment workers, socialist and feminist delegates to the 1910 International Conference of Socialist Women called for an annual International Women's Day. It was to be a day for working class women's demands and an expression of international solidarity and resistance as imperialism ravaged the lives of women the world over. We are told generations later that the feminism of the 1960s, a radical period in women's political history, can be summed up as the personal is the political. But we forget the other side of that slogan, that there are no personal solutions to political problems. That feminism has always meant collective struggle. Today, feminism has largely come to mean, for many women, strategies to address the problems that women face. So what we see in the media, that feminism means sharing housework with your partner, that feminism means to be sex positive. I mean, we even read about how Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton are trumpet the cry of feminism. But really, the only women for whom individual solutions might be possible are bourgeois women. Patriarchal violence and the super exploitation of women under globalization only continues to escalate. What is imperialism serving up for working class women today? What do we know? We know that a borderless war on terror and the war-fed monopoly capitalism, fierce competition between advanced capitalist states for resources and for markets, low wages or no wages, dangerous, dirty, degrading working conditions, increased deportations, increased restrictions on the rights of immigrants, criminalization of resistance, a know your place patriarchal resurgence. The list goes on. For the most marginalized women living in Canada, imperialism is not a foreign or an abstract concept. This is not a term that women are unfamiliar with. For the most marginalized women living in Canada, colonialism and imperialism have been daily features in the lives of Indigenous women in the Americas and the lives of third world women for centuries. As oppressed and exploited women, we know that capitalist patriarchy underpins the crisis that women face today. Women's reproductive labor continues to form the basis of capitalist profits. In Canada, it is upper-class women who are able to afford the luxury of live-in nannies, who live in a form of virtual modern-day slavery. Yet on the other side of the tracks, the majority of those who live in poverty in Canada are working-class women and their children. Disproportionately, Indigenous women and off-reserve. We know that 1 in 7 women in Canada lives below the poverty level. Upwards of 60% of single mother families will be reliant on welfare at some point. We know that here in BC, we have the worst child poverty rates in Canada. Our families are more and more reliant upon government services, more deeply impacted by the neoliberal slashing of those very same services. Healthcare, education, community-based services, childcare, welfare. And on top of our increasing burden of work in the home, we continue to be segregated into cheap labor and working in the public sector, which are often impacted by cuts, teaching, nursing, food preparation, serving, and managing households. Our work is devalued despite decades of struggle. Women in Canada continue to only be paid 70% of what our male counterparts earn. We know that migrant women in Canada form a source of super cheap labor, often providing privatized health care in the households of bourgeois families, basically modern-day slavery for the Canadian middle and upper classes. Migrant women in Canada face a double burden of racist and profit-driven state and corporate practices, temporary foreign worker programs designed to extract profits from them. And yet, on the flip side, we see that this prettied up version of bourgeois feminism is exported and promoted around the world to sidetrack or silence or undermine women's struggles. For example, in Afghanistan, where Canada and other imperialist powers use the rhetoric of liberating Afghani women to justify switching a reactionary patriarchal regime for a non-compliant regime with reactionary patriarchal views. The rhetoric is selectively applied throughout the Islamic world, where US, Canada, and their imperialist partners want to target and undermine the legitimacy of existing regimes. Meanwhile, Israel is held up as a bastion of women's rights despite its violent occupation, its targeting and jailing of Palestinian women, and denial of their right of return and other basic rights. So we stand here tonight saying we must decry bourgeois feminism, and we must steer away from an insistence on a shallow individual identity-based politics. We don't want to continue to ignore glaring economic injustices that are happening in the world. We must decry the intended political structures that support economic exploitation. We must decry the use of Western liberal feminism to undermine women's revolutionary anti-imperialist struggles for national and social transformation. At what point do we say, as women, it's not enough to struggle for a semblance of equality under capitalism? At what point do we acknowledge and name the fact that some women are gaining their so-called liberation on the backs of other women? When do we collectively refuse this deal? Genuine struggles for liberation exist in a direct challenge to bourgeois domination and exploitation. We actively seek out those struggles to foster an international understanding of building reciprocal principled solidarity. We honor the women who number among the fallen martyrs, the freedom fighters, the political prisoners. We honor the revolutionary women. We honor the revolutionary women who continue to struggle with their own movements for an end to patriarchal culture and for women to be pushed forward into the leadership. For the process of these inspiring struggles, we actually can see the seeds of new relations of reciprocal collaboration taking place. We actually can begin to see what genuine equality in this world might look like.
Here.
So we are very glad you could join us here today. It's always an unknown how this will go. So we're going to have a very short video from Leila Khaled. We're going to hear from our three speakers. And then at the end of the discussion period, we'll have room for questions and discussion. And then at the end, we actually invite you to gather together at the front with our placards, and we'll take a group photograph in honor of these particular four women who are all facing targeting and harassment for their political positions and their struggles. So we will begin with a short video message by Leila Khaled. She is a Palestinian leader and a member of the Palestinian National Council and has been a prominent figure in the struggle to liberate Palestine since the 1960s. One of the most legendary Palestinian leaders, she is also an embodiment of the leading role of Palestinian women in the resistance to colonization, occupation, and imperialism. And I'm hoping I can. Oh. Yep.
Sisters and comrades, on behalf of Palestinian women and myself, I extend revolutionary greetings with roses to every one of you. These roses are from the fields of our occupied Palestine. We share you the same struggle of women's rights, but for us, Palestinians, we are still struggling for our humanity, which is daily violated by the apartheid state of Israel. It's a hard struggle, yet we as women are determined to achieve our goals as a part of our people's struggle. I believe that women are so committed to protect life because we give life to our children who represent our future. Our common struggle against all kinds of oppression and discrimination gives us more strength and patience to achieve our goals. On the International Day for Women, I congratulate all of you and all women in every part of this world, especially those who are still struggling for their freedom, equality, democracy, and justice. Sisters and comrades, Palestinian women are still suffering from Israeli occupation and its terrorist policy against them and their people. While those women who live in diaspora are also suffering, being outside of their homeland and not allowed to be back to their homeland. I'm one of them. But I assure you that in spite of all these sufferings, Palestinian women are determined to reach the goal of the struggle, the rightful return to our Palestine, to all Palestine, the right for self-determination as a right for all people of the world, and the Palestinians are part of them also. And to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine, to build as the end of the historic conflict in our country and the historical solution to build a democratic state in Palestine, which will ensure equality, freedom, and social justice to all. Long live the 8th of March. Together against imperialism, Zionism, and occupation, we can make the world a better and a happier place to live in. From Palestine, with love, we will win. Goodbye.